It is Talk 99.5, 13 hours of live and local conversation, and we so appreciate the conversation with you, and we'll get back into it. We had a nice inflation talk in the 6 o'clock hour, which probably invigorated some and put others back to bed.
Yeah. Don't go back to bed. Yeah, you don't want to go back to bed on this. You need to be paying attention to what's happening.
We'll get back to matters of the federal government coming up. I guess this next topic is a matter of the federal government as well, now that I think about it. We've been discussing the U.S. Senate race and predicting that there would be other voices before all is said and done in that race. There's a recent Club for Growth poll out that shows Mo Brooks in a commanding lead over Katie Britt. Some of the also-rans are in there, and a large portion of the voting population in Alabama is still undecided. I think that was at 23%, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right in that.
And there's a new hat in said ring, so to speak. And without further ado, let's introduce you to a name that I'm certain you'll be hearing from over these next several months and into the new year as the U.S. Senate race gets up and going. It is Mike Durant. If you don't know the name Mike Durant, just listen up and look it up, because he has an incredible story and a future chapter to tell regarding public service, and it's our privilege to have him in studio this morning. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Matt. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here, and honored to have the opportunity to announce my candidacy today.
So you are running for United States Senate in Alabama.
It's official this morning.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks for being, I guess we're the first, huh? Yeah, that's awesome.
Well,
thank you so much for coming on.
We certainly appreciate that. I know all the other talk radio hosts will give you the business, but just tell them that you knew that I would yell the loudest if you didn't come here first.
Well, you've made me a believer.
Mike, I'm betting that there are people listening now that don't have the name association quite yet. But I'm hopeful that they will have a chance to listen this morning, because yours is an incredible story of honor and public service and bravery in the face of duty. And I'm going to let you tell the story. I'm going to get out of the way and let you tell your story. Let's start with your decision to serve your country in the military and go from there.
Okay, so we're going back a few years.
A year to Fort Rucker, Alabama, right?
I was born at a very young age. No, the first time I saw an Army helicopter, I thought, wow, that is an amazing thing. I wonder if there's any way, this is a teenager growing up in a rural area in New Hampshire. Is there any way that could possibly be something that I could do? And then as I looked into it more and more, I realized that, in fact, there was. And it's just another example of all the opportunities we have in this great country. And, I worked my way through the system, and I applied, and I got accepted, and I arrived for flight school in the early 80s. And, at Fort Rucker, and then was fortunate to get the helicopter that I wanted. Blackhawks were brand new, and I got the only Blackhawk slot in the class, and went straight into them. Then I went to Korea, and I flew medevac there for a couple of years. And, you think about it, I was only 22 years old, and I look at my kids today, and, God bless them, they're great kids, but I'm not sure I'm crawling in the back of a helicopter where one of them is in charge when they're 22 years old. But with that kind of responsibility, it forces you to mature. It forces you to develop, skills to make good decisions and own that responsibility. And I'm very fortunate to have had that chance. And then I found out about this special unit called the 160th, and it was just coming to life also. And it was, really the dawn of the age of terrorism, unfortunately. And people in America started to realize that it could affect us as a country. And we had created some organizations that, their charter was to give us a capability to counter that threat. And it sounded really exciting. I had read Tom Clancy books. I liked all that stuff. And I thought, wow, this is sort of the real deal. I could get involved in this. So I applied for that, and I got accepted. And that is a long process. I mean, just getting to the point where you can be accepted is a long process. But then you go through training, you have to progress through various stages, and ultimately I reached the pinnacle of what I thought was my aviation career, which was to be a flight lead in that unit, flying combat missions with Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, Army Rangers. I mean, all just the most elite operators in the world. I mean, what an honor that is. I mean, I still look back at it and think, that I call those my formative years, actually, because when you're around people like that are so dedicated to the mission, and they're so proficient, and they're so just highly trained, it can't help but change who you are and how you think. And I just can't be thankful enough for having that experience. And of course, that leads us to Somalia.
You were the pilot during what was known as Operation Gothic Serpent. Talk to us about the mission and its purpose.
Yeah, so Gothic Serpent was a mission in Somalia. Most people wouldn't be able to even put their finger on the map and locate Somalia in the early 90s, but there was a drought there. A lot of people had lost their lives due to the famine, and in fact, it's on a biblical scale. There were 300,000 fatalities in Somalia. It was a big human loss of human life. And there were relief organizations trying to help. They brought in food and supplies and so on and so forth, but it really wasn't turning the tide. So we realized in order to really get our arms around this thing, we need to send the military in. So we sent the military in December of 92. Now, I was not involved in that phase. That was more of a conventional, we're going to go in, we're going to secure the supply lines, we can provide protection for the relief organizations. And it was highly successful. I mean, overnight, we took control of it. And hopefully we'll circle back on this, but part of the reason why it was so successful was we had tremendous capability as a military, and we had tremendous credibility as a military. And our adversaries realized there is no way that we can beat the U.S. military, so they just basically gave way. That's what you want. I mean, it's like the defense on the other side of the ball just sort of walking off the field saying, I can't stop this offense, I'm just going to leave. I mean,
you'd say we saw the same thing in the initial taking of Iraq, right?
Right.
We went into Iraq, and,
absolutely.
And you saw the Iraqi military say, "Oh, well, they're coming, so we're done."
That was the third largest army in the world, by the way. The Iraqi army at the time was the third largest army in the world. We turned them into the second largest army in Iraq in 100 hours. I love that. Think about that. I mean, 100 hours. Okay, so I mean that just shows you what our military can do, both with a combination of capability, but also credibility. I mean, the enemy has to fear you. And we're going to get to this later, I'm sure, because we trade that away politically a lot, and that can cost us in the future. So anyway, back to Somalia. And it was a successful mission, which then transitioned to nation building. And I've been saying for 25 years, if you hear that word, unless you really have a strategic interest, you better run the other way, because it's not easy to do. It's going to take you 2 generations to make that happen, because you're trying to change a culture. You're trying to change the fundamental functioning of that society, right? And you can't just roll in there and say, no, you're going to do this and you're going to be like us and then go away in 6 months. It takes a long, long time. So anyway, we don't decide the mission in the military. Our political leaders do. So our mission is now help the Somali people bring their country back to life and make it look more like a Western type civilization, which is doable, but it takes a huge commitment. Well, there are always going to be people who resist. If you think about Afghanistan, who resists in Afghanistan? The Taliban, right? Mm-hmm. Other terrorist organizations. There's always these adversaries out there. Well, in Somalia, that adversary really was connected to Al-Qaeda.
I mean, do you think that, and I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but do you think the change in mission strategy, if that's what you're describing, came about because of a change in political leadership?
100%.
So the Clinton administration came in January of 1993 and just changed the focus of your strategy.
Well, not only they changed the focus, but because the liberals, the left, doesn't fundamentally understand how difficult it is to do the military mission. They think of it in terms of politics. They don't think of it in terms of the tactical challenges that exist on the battlefield. Oftentimes, they don't listen to the tactical commanders, which they have the clearest visibility about what's really going on. I mean, you just saw it, right? I mean, there's testimony right now, mm-hmm. right? You were told, sir, mm-hmm. that this thing's going to fall apart if we do this way, mm-hmm. and terrorism will go back.
Joe Biden was never told that. Come on,
oh,
Mike.
my goodness.
Bunch of fake news. Joe said that. Well, wait a minute. 5 different generals said otherwise. Anyway, so back to Somalia.
Right. So we get called upon because now you've got essentially terrorist organizations attacking U.S. military forces and relief organizations to basically undermine the initiative to bring Somalia back to life. And our mission was to go in there and capture these guys. So it's a list of 50 people. They're part of what was called the Haber Getter clan. They all supported this guy named General Muhammad Farah Aidid. So essentially it's a manhunt, and that's what our units do. I mean, normal conventional military forces are not necessarily trained or experience with those kind of manhunt missions, where that's what we do. That's one of our primary missions. So we roll in there and we start executing missions, and we did 6 of them, all very, very successful. We captured, I think, close to 30 people on the list, including the number 2 guy. A lot of people in hindsight say, had we just stopped after catching the number 2 guy, the whole thing would have fallen apart and then we would have been successful. But, again, that's not our mission. Our mission is capture the number 1 guy. You could call him the Osama bin Laden of Somalia, actually. So we kept going forward, and then ultimately that leads to October 3rd, which is what the Black Hawk Down mission is all focused on.
Right, and everyone, and that leads us to the phrase that I think everyone will recognize, whether they know your name, Mike, or not, and that is Black Hawk Down. And it has to be obviously one of the seminal days in your life, and the story is it's moving just to think about what you went through, and incredibly moving to have you relate it to us in studio. We'll do that in just a moment, if you don't mind. We'll take a short time out. Mike Durant has announced his candidacy for the United States Senate in Alabama. He'll be running against these other announced candidates, and we'll get to know him this morning, and I'm sure you'll get to know him from a political perspective over the course of the coming weeks and months. 13 after the hour, back in a moment on Matt and Val, Talk 99.5. It is Talk 99.5. Matt Murphy, Valerie Vining, The Painting Company, and Peter Past are bringing you this portion of the show. My friend Peter wants to come and give you a free estimate on any paint job that you have at your house, and he's done, just recently, he was right here in our studios at our radio station giving an estimate because we're getting some painting done here, and you know what? We call the best. The Painting Company, 995-5559, 995-5559 for The Painting Company. I was grumping about my back earlier.
You were.
I take it all back.
Oh, really? You good now?
Well,
there's nothing to grump about,
no,
right?
Mike Durant's in studio with us.
No grumping.
I got no grumping anymore,
right.
Considering his life story and some of the things he went through with Black Hawk Down. So that's where we were, Mike, Black Hawk Down, and I guess that's October 3rd of 1993, correct?
Yes, it is.
I want to the story is well told, but for us, please just relate it from your perspective that day.
Sure. So it's the 7th mission, and we're still after some senior leadership within the Al-Qaeda organization. I'm sorry, not the Al-Qaeda, the Haber Getter organization. And intel is solid. It's daytime, it's the afternoon. And I was a flight leader, so I'm in the operations center, and I'm right there with General Garrison and all the senior leadership, and they're trying to decide, is this too risky, is it not too risky? And we knew what the risks were. There's been a lot of hindsight looking back saying, well, you guys shouldn't have really gone. Well, in the moment, I can say personally, I felt comfortable enough. That's how I essentially summarize my view of the risks on that mission. And we launched. This is a big mission. It's 24 aircraft, so there's a lot of helicopters going into the target here. We got the elite warriors on board, and they're going to go in and they're going to capture these guys, and they did. And we had a couple of things, impact the early stages of the operation. We had one Ranger fall from the aircraft. One aircraft had to do a go around, which means they couldn't land on the first pass. But overall, it went as planned. And we're about to wrap it up, and unfortunately, the worst of all possible things happens, and our first Black Hawk gets shot down by a rocket-propelled grenade. That was my good friends Cliff Walcott and Donovan Briley. They were both killed when the aircraft hit the ground. Everyone in the back survived, but they lost their lives. And now the commander's got a ground convoy. He's got a crash site. He's got a target site. He doesn't have all the assets to even do one of those things, and he now has all three because we'd been denied some assets that we had asked for leading up to that point. So it's basically, crisis management and doing everything we can. We got people just coming up with ideas and, putting their lives on the line. I mean, it happened. I don't even know how many times, over and over and over, people sacrificed themselves for their brothers in arms, and just incredible, display of what America's military is all about. So after a few moments, another aircraft got shot down. That was the search and rescue bird. Again, good friends of mine, Dan Gelada and Herb Rodriguez, the company commander. Fortunately, no loss of life on that one. They made it back to the airfield. And then the commander wants me to replace the first bird shot down because that bird was orbiting the target, providing some aerial fire support for the operators that were still on the target. So, they need that support. So we came in and we started to orbit It's a bad idea. I mean, the bottom line is, wasn't my plan, but I executed it. And, in hindsight, it was not a good idea. You're in daytime, moving slow, urban environment, high threat. The enemy's shooting RPGs and everything else at us. So it's a matter of time before you get shot down. And we did. We made it around the target maybe 4 times. I was flying the aircraft, and the RPG blew the tail off. And you don't have to be an expert in rotary wing aircraft to know that that's a bad thing. The only thing you can do to stop the spin, which is the result of losing your tail, is shut the engines off, which is not a good thing either. And we came down really, really hard in a little shanty town right in the middle of the city. Now, we learned a lot from Vietnam. We built better helicopters and a lot of safety features, and that's the only reason I'm here today. That and maybe a little bit of God's grace in helping me get that thing on the ground. But we hit really hard. We hit so hard I broke my femur in half. I crushed vertebrae in my spine, knocked unconscious. And everybody else, similar injuries. Crew chiefs probably hurt a little bit worse, actually, because their seats were not quite as good as ours. But we're alive.
How many men were on board?
So 4, just the crew left. We had 22 on board, but we put all our guys on the target, and then we were providing that fire support. And then the most incredible display of courage I've ever seen, 2 Delta Force snipers who are also on the mission, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart, get on the radio, and they ask for permission to be dropped in. They're not being told to go. These guys realize that we are in desperate need of assistance, and they ask to go. And the commander, as I know it, now I'm on the ground, I'm not involved in these conversations, but as I know it, initially said no because he thought it was too high risk. But they insisted, and he finally realized that he had to allow them to do what they wanted to do, or else he's giving us away or giving us up. So Gary and Randy get dropped in, and together we fight off the enemy. We were surrounded, vastly outnumbered. I think that the enemy believes we actually killed 27 of them among the 4 of us who were still able to get in the gunfight. So you get some sense of just how much shooting was going on here. But eventually we're outnumbered.
And you're attempting to fight back
while you're injured
with a broken vertebrae and a broken femur.
Yes. Now, the one thing that's not right about Black Hawk Down is Black Hawk Down shows me, shooting up everything from the cockpit. I didn't shoot from the cockpit, but I was on the ground, and I did have 2 different weapons. I fired all the rounds out of one, and then I got another one from Randy Sugart. We were the last 2 standing, and he was standing. I was on my back. And then we were overrun, and I can't describe it. I mean, it was the most horrifying thing you can imagine. I mean, these people are bent on just tearing us apart, and they did in some cases. And
out of that fight, and with only a minute before we have to go to the news,
yep.
I'll ask this: out of that fight, how many survived?
Out of the crash site 2, only I survived.
You were the only survivor.
Yes,
and I just note this because it's just a bone-chilling level of courage that Gary Gordon and Randy Sugart died as well.
And they were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their
And you cite them as the reason you're alive today.
Absolutely.
All right. With that in mind, we'll move forward and talk about the next level of service with Mike Durant, and that is his volunteering for service in the United States Senate. He is running for Senate. He's announced that today, and we'll talk to him about why he feels drawn to that public service in just a second. Right now, Jason Lee has first news in the Talk 99.5 newsroom. We're back in a moment. It's Matt and Val on Talk 99.5. All right, Talk 99.5 and Talk99.5.com. Don't forget about eXp Realty. Stephanie Brumbelow and her team helped me sell my house. I mentioned the sale of that home, and Stephanie made it so easy. I had 5 offers in the first day, and 3 of them were above asking price. That's what Stephanie gives to you. She is on top of her game. If you're buying or selling, eXp Realty, Stephanie Brumbelow, agent205.com, agent205.com. I don't know about you, Valerie, but I could sit here and talk to Mike Durant about his experience in the military until 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Or I could sit here and talk to him about his decision to run for U.S. Senate until 10 o'clock. Or I could ask him how to fly a helicopter.
Yeah.
Which
I don't know. That's the one thing I don't think I've ever been in is a helicopter. I've been in a blimp. I've been in all kinds of small planes, but I've never. A helicopter is one of the things.
You were
I've
in the
never
plane
done.
that I jumped out of.
Yes, I was in the co-pilot seat, which I'll never do again because he turned the plane nose first and went straight down.
Plane's got to get down before the people.
And I was like, what? And my tush is up out of the seat, and the seatbelt's got me strapped in. I thought, thank goodness for the seatbelt, because I would have gone through the front windshield. Right. Unbelievable.
And Mike Durant
Mike's like, whatever.
Politely sitting over here smiling.
Whatever, y'all.
Yeah. Sounds terrifying.
Well, one of these days during one of these conversations, I do want to have an in-depth conversation about the art of piloting a helicopter, because I know you're obviously well-versed in all of that. Do you still train?
So I fly every now and then. I just got to fly last week, actually, the campaign video that we released on flying a helicopter and that, and it was, I mean, you just don't lose it. You know, it's part of who you are. When you've flown as much as I have, you know, it becomes second nature. It's an extension of your body, really.
And you were telling us during the break that, and I don't know that we put a cap on the experience that you had in Somalia, and I don't want to rush that, but in the aftermath of your military service, you started a business career up in North Alabama involving aerospace, obviously.
Absolutely. You know, I know a lot of people in the industry. I know the industry well. You know, Alabama is just a great place for business. So, all the pieces were there, and I thought it's an opportunity for me to do something I've thought about, ever since I retired. So in 2008, I started Pinnacle Solutions, and it's been very successful. We say we do everything in the aerospace industry except build the aircraft, and that's literally everything. We got close to actually over 200 people working here in Alabama, and over 500 people total.
The other thing is too, I don't think you're unfamiliar with anything going on in Washington. Didn't you do something with the Bush Cheney with veterans, and talk maybe a little bit about your connection with doing that? Yes,
I've been contacted by various people along the way to support their campaign, and obviously if they're conservative Republicans and they're running for office, I'm going to be behind them. That's that our values are the same. So proud to say that I was able to support that.
Let's put kind of something of a cap on the story of Somalia before we move on to other things, and that is your time in captivity and then your eventual release from captivity. For those who don't know, tell the kind of the end of that portion of the tale.
Sure. And I did write my own book. I know Black Hawk Down is the one that everybody's kind of familiar with because of the movie, but my own book called In the Company of Heroes is essentially where we're picking up right now. It picks up where Black Hawk Down leaves off, because Black Hawk Down ends basically at the end of the battle, and that's the beginning of my captivity. And it was just the craziest experience you could ever. I mean, imagine, you think you're going to work on any given day and doing the same thing you've done your whole career, and all of a sudden you're abducted by aliens or a foreign power, and now you're held against their will. Your will. It comes out of nowhere. No one thinks it's ever going to happen to them, but it was just a crazy experience. It seems strange, but there were actually times when I laughed in captivity. I mean, it was fearful beyond belief. It was sorrowful beyond belief, but then there were also moments of levity. Your mind does crazy things to help yourself deal with the situation. But in the end, it was simply about maintaining the will to survive. That's what it's all about. That's what they teach us in survival school. Never give up. You can't ever give up. And that's what I committed myself to every day. I thought about my young son, who was 1. I left the day before his first birthday. And, I had to do it for him. Mm-hmm. I had to do it for the unit. And, I wouldn't fail them. And, I think one thing people will remember, and it's in the campaign video that we launched this morning, is my interrogation video. That made kind of a big splash internationally. Mm-hmm. CNN tells me, even this in 1993, that thing aired in 127 countries within about an hour when they filmed it. I mean, it's crazy. So, that was them trying to get me to make political statements, which I did not do. They still use that video today to train people how to deal with a situation like that, because there's not a lot of us, which is fortunate, But I ended up spending 11 days in captivity, and then I was released unconditionally because of the amazing work of a gentleman named Robert Oakley, a former ambassador. Somalis trusted him. He was a straight shooter. They called him a shoot straighter. They didn't speak very good English. And he got me out of there unconditionally, and I returned to my home.
God, and thank God for that.
Well, I can't say it enough. I'm so thankful. And going all the way back to Gary and Randy, I wouldn't be here without them either.
Most of us in the comfort of our homes or our places of business, automobiles, enjoying the liberties of the United States of America, I know that we can't imagine that experience. And I just need to say thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And I think what's important to note, though, is that my experience is unique, but the sacrifices made by our military on any given day, they're all around the world, separated from their families, doing the nation's business, and we got to be loyal to them. And that's, one of the things that sometimes politically we fail to do. And that's going to lead into the next question.
Well,
that's
I mean, right. I mean,
Right.
so when you, knowing what you have personally experienced, knowing what you've gone through with your overall experience in the United States military, then you look at something like what happened in Afghanistan and the 13 who lost their lives in the aftermath of we pull out and then we get troops back in. And then it just seems from our perspective like a total mess. Did it seem that way from your perspective? I imagine so. And was that a part of all of this? Had your decision already been made to run for U.S. Senate, or did that just kind of confirm to you, this is why I need to get in this race?
Well, that, and not just that, but that was absolutely a catalyst. I mean, I still remember the moment when I saw things start to fall apart, and I was just so upset because I know the sacrifice that went into the last 20 years of our involvement in Afghanistan. And, whether you think it was right to do or wrong to do, the bottom line, militarily, it was a success. Literally hundreds of thousands of people, get the credit for that. And, we've got people who lost their lives. We got families that, will never recover from that sacrifice. We have people with injuries that they'll never recover from. And it was all simply thrown away for what I call a soundbite. The administration wanted to say, we're out by the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and nothing else mattered. And that, to me, is a complete betrayal of our military.
And so with that in mind, do you believe our commander-in-chief has that blood on his hands?
100%. I mean, he was told, I don't question the generals when they testify and say, look, we told you so. I don't question them. He has that blood on his hands.
And, I think many people were as frustrated as you were, but no one could probably be more frustrated than you, Mike, being that you've been through what you've been through. And to know that Biden didn't have to do it that way, there is no reason for it. We all can see that. But I cannot imagine the level of frustration for somebody with your military background and what you went through to actually watch what Biden did with his situation.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Somalia is very similar, actually, because the Clinton administration did the same thing. Within 3 months of that mission, they just basically released all the people we captured and pulled us all out. And so I know how it feels. Now, this Afghanistan is on a much greater scale, and I think the long-term significance, that's the issue we should also be very concerned about.
It makes us look weak.
Well, it makes us look weak, and we basically gave a terrorist breeding ground back to the Taliban.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think they're going to do?
Well, and our own congressman, 6th Congressional District Representative Gary Palmer, has told us, and when Gary says something like this, I trust and believe him. He says, listen, I can't tell you everything that we've learned behind closed doors. It would be a violation of the oath that I took to protect that intelligence information. But when all of this does come out, America will be even more shocked and frustrated about how all of that went down, and the Americans that are still in country left behind because of the ineptitude of the Biden administration, or ineptitude or just a non-caring attitude.
Agree. And I mean, there are individuals out there doing basically rescue missions on any given day, getting people out of Afghanistan on their own, generating support financially to get airplanes in there to get people out because our country essentially abandoned the whole mission.
All right. I know that you have a lot of people to talk to today, considering that this is the day that you've announced your candidacy for the U.S. Senate. But let's tilt to a couple of political questions before we say goodbye, because we'll have plenty of conversations, and I just so enjoy hearing the backstory first and talking to you directly about your experiences within the United States military. But how does this, so from a political perspective, the obvious question is this. No one is going to, come after you based on your military service, anybody would have a brain and anybody that knows your backstory. But at the same time, entering the arena of politics, it's more than just military service. It is public service in a different way. And frankly, from a political perspective, your task ahead of you, Mike, is making sure people remember or know the name Mike Durant in a very short amount of time, considering the name ID that your political opponents have. Talk to us about that mission in front of you.
Well, we understand that, or I understand that, and that's what we're going to do over the next 6 or 7 months, because most people say the real campaign begins in January, but you got to get your name out there, and that's what I'm doing. And I didn't do it earlier because as a business owner, my responsibility first is to my employees. I've got to make sure they're set up for success. I can't just say, "Hey, I'm angry, I'm out of here, good luck." So there's been a process of getting that all structured so that the business is going to carry on fine while I am somewhat distracted, which I know I will be for the next several months. But it's a multi-pronged attack, I'll call it, to put it in military terms. It's going to be a combination of an air campaign and a ground campaign. We're on the radio today. There's going to be commercials going out later. I mean, we're going in strong because we do recognize that we have to raise that name recognition. As soon as you say, "Oh yeah, Black Hawk Down," I remember that, but my name doesn't necessarily connect to that. As soon as we do that, I think people are going to remember who I am, and once they start to get to know me, they're going to know this guy is a very conservative, staunch Republican, outsider, not a lifetime politician, that has Alabama's best interests at heart, and I will earn that vote, and that's what I have to do over the next several months.
Yeah, and it's interesting the different people that are in this race. You've got Congressman Mo Brooks, who now is, of course, the front runner in this, that has a number of years of service under his belt, and knows a little bit about what's going on in Washington and how the sausage is made. You got Katie Boyd Britt, who worked under Shelby, kind of new going into the Senate race, and is behind him. I guess I want to know from you, Mike. How are you gonna combat those two? Who are the top? Number one and number two, as we look at the polls right now. How are you gonna battle what they are presenting?
Well, I see them both as career politicians. I mean, there's no question about it. You don't know what affects businesses unless you've been in one. And I've been running one for almost 14 years. So I know what affects businesses. I know what effects the COVID mandate are having on defense contractors specifically, because the rules being put on us are just so ridiculously over the top. That's the next thing you were asking me why I'm running. That's the next one in the list. And it's really the 5-meter target, as we say in the military, because, today I have to tell people, you need to get the vaccine or I'm going to have to fire you. I can't even let them work from home. It's ridiculous. Who's coming up with these rules? And why aren't more people pushing back in positions that can actually influence this legislation? It's very frustrating for me because I know the effect that's going to have. I've heard numbers as high in some companies as 20% are going to have to be released if they don't get the vaccine.
Well, it's certainly a sad day in America when we have to highlight that the CEO of Delta makes a decision for his private company and his stockholders, and we call that a bold and brave decision when it ought to be just another day at the office making a decision about a private company, when he made a decision simply to allow his employees to make the determination for themselves, between themselves and their doctors, as to what they do with the vaccine.
100%. How can you possibly think that anything but that is okay? And you're seeing some of the companies that force that mandate on their employees backtracking because they're realizing not everyone's going to do this. And these people are valuable. In my case, some have security clearances. Some take years to train to have the skills that we need to. And this is not just mid-sized business like Pinnacle. We had a tier 1 company in the office yesterday, and they were talking about they don't know how they're going to carry on. They've got unique skills that they're going to lose. And it's just one of many things on the list that have me frustrated and basically incentivizing me to get in the race. And I guess I have to draw the first blood here, but talking about Afghanistan, Mo Brooks was one of only 2 Republicans who voted for that unconditional early withdrawal. Like, it didn't matter if the Taliban started to take over, we're getting out of there. Only 2. Everybody else realized that voting for that, which was legislation initiated by Congresswoman Omar from Minnesota, which most people are probably familiar with, sided with her instead of our military. I think he's vulnerable, and if I didn't, I wouldn't be here.
Mike, just the beginning of a great conversation to be had throughout the fall and into the new year. Where can folks find out more about you, your backstory, and your political stances?
So the best place to go is MikeDurant.com, MikeDurant.com. And that's live right now, and you can pretty much learn what there is to know, and there's contact information there if you need to know more.
Look, thank you for coming by and announcing your candidacy for U.S. Senate. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for your contribution, obviously, to our United States military, and we look forward to many conversations to come.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mike. God
Here's
bless.
Mike Durant, 48 after the hour, back after this. It is Talk 99.5, Absco Fireplace and Patio, bringing you this portion of the show. Absco Fireplace and Patio, 2 good, fine people. Well, 3, really. I mean, you got Scott and Kathy, then Joy. We always forget about her.
Well, Joy and the rest of the staff.
The rest of the crew, right?
Bringing all that stuff in. Let me tell you something. What a beautiful time of the year. You guys waking up this morning, it feels good outside. Think about a fire pit in the backyard.
Ooh, yeah.
They have fire pits galore at Absco Fireplace and Patio. Of course, all the furniture for outdoors, absolutely beautiful there.
And the Big Green Egg. I mean, you cook something up on the Big Green Egg, so you got those smells going. I mean, you could bake something on the Big Green Egg, and I'm not making that up.
Pizzas. You can do pizzas on it.
there.
Yeah.
And then you got the fire pit. I mean, it's just all right there at Absco Fireplace Patio. 2 locations. Yeah, Highway 280 in Inverness and just off 119 State Park Road in Pelham, Absco Fireplace and Patio. All right, so another entrant into the political race, Mike Durant, who has quite the backstory, obviously.
Yes.
He's entering the U.S. Senate race. And look, plenty of time to get that name ID up, one would think, if you've got
I
the
think
funding
so.
to do so.
Yeah.
So remains to be seen. What I hear, Valerie, in the back rooms, Linda Blanchard maybe
Governor
shifting her
to governor.
focus to governor of the state, and then that would clear some of the field for
Yes.
a Mike Durant, a Katie Britt, and a Mo Brooks 3-way run.
Mike's right. Again, most everyone is familiar with Black Hawk Down. That whole story, we've read a lot of it. And his name, again, not readily when you hear that, do you think of him, but when you hear the story, you're like, oh, I know exactly who we're talking about. And again, he's got to get his name out and let Alabamians know that he's in the running.
I don't want to get soppy when I say this, but I will say this. We're sitting with a man who has a level of military training that you and I will never experience.
That most won't.
Was in captivity under an immense amount of physical and
Pain.
mental anguish
Yes.
for 11 days. And the one moment when he was talking about his captivity that he had to pause to collect himself
Yep.
was when he mentioned his 1-year-old son. And that tells me a lot about the man's heart. I'm just saying.
Tough moment in the room. That's all I know.
Yeah, I know that too.
Tough moment.
All right, so there's Mike Durant introducing you to the next U.S. Senate candidate to throw his hat in the race.